All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have now a quorum present. And we're about to call this meeting to order of the Full Ways and Means Committee. So if we could get everybody kind of settled. Chairman Lewis, can you report to the full committee the disposition of House Bill 237 from your Sales Tax Committee, please, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly. House Bill 237 passed out of your Sales Tax Subcommittee by substitute, and we recommend it to the full committee with a due pass recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to your committee for that hard work. Chair recognizes Chairman Martin, and if you could present this very important legislation where we can see you eye to eye, because we're all interested in this this bill. See if you're on there, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
Can you hear me? Am I on, Mr. Chairman? No. I have a red light down here.
Is that right? Okay. Proceed, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we're working on House Bill 237. The document I have, LC 1871-87S, for the full committee's consideration. If the committee recalls, we moved this out of Ways and Means last year up to rules, and with the schedule and timing of the last days of the session, it did not make it by crossover day. This is, in my opinion, a very important piece of legislation for manufacturers in Georgia. It's referred to as the integrated plant theory. There exists a situation today where there's a lot of work done with companies in Georgia and with the Department of Revenue in determining what is available for the current manufacturing sales tax exemption and what is not. For instance, a conveyor belt, parts that go with a conveyor belt, is deemed to be manufacturing equipment and therefore could be purchased exempt from sales tax, while a forklift would not be, because it could be used for other uses. What this bill seeks to do is define machinery and equipment that are necessary and integral to the manufacturing process. So one doesn't have to always have this discussion and determination. If you will recall last year, and I'll speak for them, I suppose, although there are folks from Revenue here, but while it does have a fiscal impact to the state and to local governments, the overall implementation of this, I think, will be positive in so much that it will take less revenue time to come back and work on what is and is not deductible. Plus, it will encourage manufacturers to continue to invest in Georgia when they are given the opportunity to invest in their plants and bring those up to date. This piece of legislation makes it very clear if the parts or machinery and equipment are necessary and integral to the manufacturing process, they are sales tax exempt. The second page, or actually the third page of the legislation, Mr. Chairman, just to point out, there's quite a bit of strike through in there, and that was just the original phase-in of the exemption. That language is no longer needed, so we're cleaning up the statute by striking out on page 3, lines 8 through 23. Again, Mr. Chairman, this is something the committee passed out. We have updated the effective date. The fiscal note still should apply from last year, and would respectfully ask the committee's favorable consideration and answer any questions.
24, is that Chairman Royal has a question? You waive? Oh, excuse me, Chairman Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since this is the first bill through, I don't see a sunset. Are we waiving a sunset on these?
Well, this is not, the exemption currently exists, Chairman Stevens, so we're just seeking to clarify that exemption, not in creating one, so we didn't want to put a limitation on an exemption that currently was in place by placing a sunset. Plus, these types of investments tend to go over a longer period of time and a longer planning process, so one would have to be careful about a 2-year sunset and a long-term investment that a manufacturer would make in our state.
Okay.
Chairman Royal.
Mr. Chairman, you said that this exemption is already in place, and I'm looking at the fiscal note. What is the fiscal note? Are we all already experiencing this type of loss of revenue in the state and the local governments, or is this in addition to the current experience?
I would yield to revenue to give their take on this, but my understanding is that this represents some of the loss that may be incurred on items that are being argued over now, if you will, where there has to be a determination. In other words, I would submit to you that the $11 million in 08, which and through 10, which is the first 3 years, is really probably less than that. Although I couldn't put my hands on a number, Chairman Royal, to tell you, simply because when many times revenue will deny an exemption, go to court, and there have been several cases where sometimes revenue prevails, other times the manufacturer prevails, but in all cases the lawyers win. So I think when we get down into the weeds with this, if you will, into the specific items, I question that we would actually lose that much revenue, because I think that sales tax exemption is actually happening today. It just takes pretty lengthy litigation for a manufacturer to come up with that, and it also costs resources of the Department of Revenue. So
you think a portion of that revenue loss is already being occurred?
I would suspect so, sir, but I couldn't give you a specific answer and wouldn't want to represent that to it.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman Sims?
I was just wondering, if you remember last year, we had a similar bill to this. I think it was last year, maybe 2 years ago, where we had talked about waxes in the part in page 3, line 4. I just wondered if you would be amenable to the word waxes being added to that part right after the word dyes and replacement dyes on page 4. Page 3, line 4.
That would be, up to the will of the committee if the chair would entertain that. I mean, I think you're referring to a situation where there has been a question as to
yes,
is that a part of manufacturing?
Correct.
I guess I would think that the way that the bill is written, that would be included, but I certainly wouldn't object to that if the chairman would agree to let that amendment go forward. I think
right.
It's clear that in that manufacturing process, wax is an integral
part of the
manufacturing process.
That's correct. I just wanted to make it well known in there that only affects 2 companies in Georgia, I think, but it may be more that would use that wax dye as a part of that.
Okay. Is that it?
Yes, sir.
26. Who's that? Chairman Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Martin, question on the fiscal note. Reading the fiscal note in the second paragraph, where you're talking, it talks about there's going to be a reduction in state revenues ranging from $11.7 million in FY08, and then it drops to $11.34 million in FY10, which, and you read the next one, it reads similarly, which leads me to the questions that I'm asking myself. That is, first of all, where did this originate? Is this a Department of Revenue bill, or did the industry come to you?
Yeah, this, I believe, is done in several other states, Chairman Mills. Again, there exists a situation where we have a sales tax exemption on equipment used in manufacturing in Georgia. And I think you were probably here when that was originally passed, and the phase-in language is on page 3. What we're trying to alleviate with the passage of this legislation is that process that exists where, for instance, a conveyor belt is deductible, but a forklift isn't because it could be used for other things. We're trying to go to the necessary and integral to manufacture, because it is my belief, and I would yield to the wisdom of the committee, but I believe what the legislature intended when they made that exemption was to promote manufacturing in Georgia and to give them an opportunity and encourage them to invest, not to get into a splitting of hairs situation that a conveyor belt is deductible, a forklift is not. The line on which the products are made is deductible, but the catwalk over it is not. So this was brought by the manufacturing community because there does exist a situation today where a lot of the litigation that the Department of Revenue finds themselves in is trying to get down to what currently fits this code section and is deductible without this bill.
Right.
I know.
And could I follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, please.
Then if the fiscal note is going to be a reduction as to what it will, the cost the state will incur, then that is an increase on our manufacturing community in the way of deductions. Is that wrong?
No, well, I believe, no, I understand what you're saying. In words, if it costs less, are they paying more? And I think, Chairman Mills, what you're finding is when the fiscal note was prepared, they are estimating the additional manufacturing equipment that would be purchased in Georgia that would be exempt if this legislation passes. I think it probably, Chairman Mills, is more of a statement with that number going down to the fact that we aren't getting manufacturing jobs in Georgia. We aren't getting that type of manufacturing investment because it is more difficult, and quite frankly, some other things that this committee is looking at, the tax on energy used in manufacturing, that we're losing manufacturing jobs, and when there gets to be an opportunity for a company to expand or build a new plant, sometimes that's not happening in our communities around Georgia, and I think this bill goes a long way to that. Now, revenue is here, and perhaps they would like to speak to that. But my understanding is because the decrease you see in the fiscal note is simply their estimation based on the current investment projection that manufacturing investment in Georgia is on the decline, and we need legislation like this to try to raise that up. My information is that closing or losing a large manufacturing plant in Georgia can cost up to $80 million in taxes and investment into a local economy in terms of jobs and people that pay taxes that work at that. So it's very important for us, in my opinion, to keep these manufacturing jobs in Georgia. And to be honest, for the committee, I don't know that we have, well, I'm pretty sure that we don't have a large manufacturing facility in the 47th District, the one which I represent, but I know around Georgia manufacturing has been and is important. So I think that's what we're trying to do here.
So the reduction in the amount of revenue that will be coming into the state if this bill passes and becomes law is not based on the language that we're changing, that they're not going to be able to exempt certain types of equipment that they were exempting prior to this. It's what you're telling me is it's based on the fact that the industry is going downhill.
Well, yes, sir. And to be clear, this bill seeks to have more equipment exempted than is available to exemption today. It seeks to have machinery and equipment that is necessary and integral, some of which would be deemed under the current code not exempt today. So it seeks to exempt more equipment. That's why you have a large $11 million impact. I think the projection from 11.7 down to 11.34 is based on the scale or the projection of the manufacturing investment that would occur in Georgia with or without this bill. We're on the manufacturing investment in Georgia is on the decline. I think I could be safe in saying that. That's why you see the revenue impact go from 11.7 to 11.34. Now, I would submit that if we promote this legislation and look like a more manufacturer-friendly state, that will be more than made up by the jobs that we gain and that money rolling through the economy on a supply-side economic basis. I'm not a great economist, but I believe if we provide jobs to Georgia, they'll spend the money here, and we'll get that in terms of transaction tax and other purchasing.
Well, and that was the reason for my friendly questions was I want to make sure that we're protecting our manufacturing industry and not cutting some exemptions out from them that we didn't intend to, and so that was where the questions were coming from.
Yes, sir. The Georgia Manufacturers Association, I believe they have representatives here. They've spoken in previous subcommittee in favor of the legislation. They are supportive of that.
Well, and I also have to think in interpreting the fiscal note that there's a finite amount of this now newly exempted equipment that will be purchased, and it won't all wear out in 1 year.
That's correct, sir.
There's going to be a declining once they get the benefit of the new necessary and integral to the process equipment that there'll be, just like with depreciation, decline. We're blessed on this committee, though, to have Chairman Jeff Lewis, who is from an area that has an abundance of manufacturing and understands this industry very well, and I'd like to, in the discretion of the chair, ask him for his comments on this very subject, if you don't mind, and then others for questions in just a minute.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And kind of in response to Chairman Mills' question and to expound on the explanation by Representative Martin, sort of the genesis of this occurred in the year 2006 when Representative Martin and I were both part of a study committee called the Business Incentive Study Committee, where we studied tax policies as it relates to the business world as well as other economic development incentives tools that we use in the state. And we had one meeting that was devoted entirely to manufacturing incentives, and that was a day-long meeting. It was probably the most interesting meeting that we had, and we heard from a number of individual plant managers, not the people we commonly see every day in the hallway, but people who are in the plant day to day running this, and they run into this problem. And when those plant managers try to sell to their corporate headquarters the need for expansion or to increase the product line or something, they almost always lose out in Georgia for a number of reasons, but one reason is due to this. I think I'm safe in saying that we're one of the only, maybe the only state in the Southeast that has not exempted equipment along with machinery that's in the production process. So we are at a handicap from that standpoint on this issue. So when these plant managers are competing for expanded production, they're competing against their own sister plants in other states. And there was some hair splitting going on about equipment such as forklifts that moves product from one area of the plant to another. Some in the state would looks at forklifts as equipment, while others may look at it as machinery. But yet it's integral to the process of producing. So the hope is through those discussions and hearings and what Representative Martin is attempting to do in this bill will clear all that up, and we can be on par with our surrounding states here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I think Chairman Rice was next.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Martin, I think it's a great bill, and I appreciate you bringing it. A question on the necessary and integral description. I mean, what you're trying to do is expand the directly into necessary and integral, and understand that. An example would do me some good. I would guess that in a number of these situations, our manufacturers are going to be hopefully into robotics and things like that, not just necessarily machining tools and this type of thing. Integral to that process is obviously the requirement to have it driven by something, which would be a computer program that is produced probably on another piece of equipment, mainly a computer. Would that be integral and necessary or not?
Yeah, yes, sir. The best example I can give, I mean, the software example is a good one. I think integral to the manufacturing process is the process could not be completed without it.
Okay.
There exist situations where cooling towers or sometimes heating elements are not in the same room that the line is in, because were they in the same room, it would not be healthy for folks to work in there. So they would be put behind a firewall, and the heat from that facility would be blown through a vent into a manufacturing process to dry something or to cure some sort of metal. Because that is set apart from the manufacturing process by a wall, that piece of equipment under our current code is arguably not manufacturing equipment. It's in a whole different room. In this case, since that is necessary and integral to the production of that product, the fact that it's behind that wall would not make it exempt from the exemption, for lack of a better term. So that's what we're after, Chairman Rice. You have gotten to the point exactly.
Follow-up question on that. Now, when you design a part that you're going to produce for a customer, you're going to do some engineering design type work too, which implies maybe a CAD terminal or something like that. Would that exemption for that particular product go all the way back to the engineering design area or not? Because that's integral and necessary.
I'm not an attorney, and nor do I work for the department. But I would not think it would go back that far. I don't think that is not, because that is not necessary and integral to the manufacturer. There are a lot of concept plans that one would engineer and maybe bring to market. Now, somebody might make that argument, an attorney someplace, but I don't think this legislation seeks to go back to that point, to the research and development phase. I think only to integral and necessary to building multiple widgets. not necessarily the original engineering to design the first one.
So the development of the robotics program would be integral and necessary in this particular case to drive the machine that's going to make the part.
Well, I think you have to, the actual software to drive the machine that does that. If 4 software programs were built and only one were used, it would be my opinion that the development costs involved in 3 of the 4 would not have been necessary and integral, only because companies will capitalize the whole cost and tend to put that in the final product.
Right. It would only be if you had to buy a new piece of software or a new piece of equipment to do that program. Okay.
Hopefully, you wouldn't suggest anything to be retroactive either. Good gracious.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I leave that to you since.
I didn't cut you off on purpose. Chairman Royal, last question.
Mr. Martin, I was just noticing that the fiscal note's a year old today, and it cites another LC number. Is the language in this bill essentially the same as the original bill?
Yes, sir. I yield to Ms. Napier, but I believe the only thing that we've changed in this is to correct the effective date so that it would not be retroactive.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Martin, I guess my question in the fiscal note gets to the local sales tax loss, and I apologize for coming in late, and you may have addressed this issue, but do you know where those sales tax losses are? I mean, which communities those local sales tax losses are in?
I couldn't split out those numbers, Chairman Scott, and give you examples. They would be spread across the manufacturing areas. And again, what we were saying about the 11 million in state and the 8 million or so in local, I don't suspect that that number would be fully realized, because I think some of the items, the machinery and equipment that we're wishing to codify in this piece of legislation probably are already being exempted, but through a litigious manner. So I don't think that the number will be that high, but that's what the fiscal note says. I guess I would say that the loss of the sales tax revenue for these parts, these pieces of equipment, and the machinery would be more than offset by the additional investment that we would get from the manufacturing community and the jobs that are added to our state.
If I could, just a general statement, Mr. Chairman, that I'm always concerned when I see the loss of the local sales tax revenue. I know that in many cases the counties and the municipalities enter into agreements with manufacturers where they've given other tax abatements or incentives to get them to come in, and they're somewhat counting on the revenue from that sales tax, which may be the only tax they're collecting, to offset the incentives that they've given. But I'm sorry that
No, that's a good question, Chairman Scott. And I would say this. I mean, the gentleman pointed out that the fiscal note is a year old, and this bill passed out of this committee last year. In that time, I have not had anyone from ACCG or GMA approach me in opposition to the bill. And they're always going to be concerned about their local tax revenues, but I think those towns and those counties in which these facilities exist know that we're losing some of them, and we're losing the opportunity to have others expand. So I believe they probably see the positive that can come out of this as weighing that against the short-term loss of the sales tax revenue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, the integrated plant theory is not a brand new idea. It's a very tried and tested methodology that's been in the industrial world now for a long time in many other states. What it does, in my humble opinion, is it interjects some predictability into the business and the economic climate that I think we owe all tax-paying Georgians at every level of our economy, and I certainly laud the author and others that have assisted in bringing this, because we are indeed eliminating what have heretofore been some pretty significant ambiguities that were in our law that place our businesses in conflict with our government, and I can't think of a worse situation that we could possibly leave our citizens in. So I hope the committee will take that into the thought process in your deliberation on this matter. And to that end, as a segue, Does anybody else have anything to say about the legislation? And then I'll ask for a motion if one exists. Anybody else wish to be heard on the legislation? Seeing no desire for that, what's the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion do pass by Chairman Lewis, a second, I think, by Chairman Mills. Did I hear that right? Now we're open for discussion or waive our typical committee rule for amendment if any might be offered. And the Vice Chairman here has already told me that he might have one in mind. Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Chairman Martin, I would just like to amend line 4, page 3, with the word waxes at the end of replacement dies. I know that Chairman Martin stated that the replacement molds were a part of that. I just want to make that perfectly direct there with those waxes because of those two companies last year that came to us with this bill last year.
Do I hear any objection to that amendment? Because if I do, I'll let him talk a lot longer about it, but if I don't hear any objection. Okay, that's in. Any further discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On House Bill 237? Any member wish to be heard? Seeing none, all in favor of the do pass motion on House Bill 237, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Representative Martin, it carries unanimously, and we will have this in rules by close of business today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the committee.
Did have one first reader, didn't I? Yeah, I was just going to go ahead and sign it. What was it? If you find out what the number is, I'll do that. Okay, we have one other bill on our agenda today. I expect our dossier on Thursday is going to be a little bit more, but it's with great anticipation. The chair recognizes Representative Peake to tell us about House Bill 851. Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I know it's been a long day already, so I appreciate your tolerance as we evaluate this piece of legislation. Should be working off of LC 187075S. Is that the correct one, Jim? This piece of legislation affects the historic tax credits, state tax credits for historic homes and commercial property in our state. Let me give you just real briefly what the current law is and what it changes. Currently, there is a 10% tax credit on rehabilitation costs for residential historic properties, 20% tax credit for rehabilitation costs for commercial properties. And there is a $5,000 cap on both residential and commercial properties, and there's limited transferability of this credit. What this bill does basically is increases the credit to 25% for both residential and commercial projects, and increases the $5,000 cap to $100,000 for residential properties and $300,000 for commercial properties. It also allows the transfer of the tax credit to facilitate potential financing. Now, why are we doing this? One, it's if you've ever gone to these areas that have been rehabilitated, you know there's a significant increase in value, significant increase in quality of life of these areas. Many of these homes have become run down, and with these improvements, make a significant difference in the communities where these projects are done. But one of the big things I want to make sure we understand too is pushing this legislation is that we need to be competitive with other states. There's 29 other states that offer tax credits. Every single state that offers a state tax credit for historic rehabilitation has higher dollar caps. Every single one. In fact, the majority of them have no caps whatsoever. And so for us to provide some incentive for folks to come do some development of these historic homes and commercial properties, we have got to be competitive as a state. We are dead last now, and so that's really one of the real purposes for moving this legislation forward. I'll be more than glad to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your consideration of this bill.
If the gentleman will yield, we certainly have some. Chairman Lewis, I saw you blinking first, sir.
Yes, sir. Representative Peake, how old does a home have to be historic?
It has to be 50 years or older.
How big does it have to be?
I do not believe there is specific size criteria,
Okay.
and I'm correct in that.
All right, thank you.
Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Peake, it seems that this bill does two things. Not only increases the tax credits, but is this permissive new language to allow for transfer of those credits?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And what would be the purpose of that?
Well, there may be times where a developer or an individual would be receiving a large tax credit, but for whatever reason, because of their tax position, may not really benefit from it for a period of time. You can carry it forward. You can't go back. You can carry it forward. And so there may be an opportunity for them to actually sell that tax credit, and there's a market for that. I think they're getting anywhere from 60 to 65 cents on the dollar. And so that it just provides some flexibility in the financing of the projects to be able to provide the transfer of the credit. It can only be transferred one time. That's it.
But these credits would be in place for 10 years?
That's correct.
And so are you suggesting that even in a 10-year period, there would still be an opportunity for them to transfer the credits?
It depends on what the individual person's financial situation is. They may want to get the money right then, and rather than wait till 6, 7 or 8 to take the tax credit. They'd rather take 60 cents on the dollar right now and take the money. So just provide some flexibility is what it does
Thank you.
for the person doing the project.
Thank you.
A couple of questions from the chair. I'm going to come back to asking you to summarize the fiscal note for us and the fiscal effects. But before that, can you point out to us in the bill, were there any provisions for, I guess, the accounting for the credits, if they're going to be transferable? Who's going to keep up with it? What if there are forfeitures? What if there are redeterminations? Those kind of things. Can you just show us the section in the bill where you've taken care of that so that we will adequately be able to manage these credits at the state level? I presume it would be done by the Revenue Department, but I can't find in here where there's any provision for that.
That is correct. It is Section 3 is where the we did chat with Revenue Department. They are comfortable with this language and the transferability provisions in here. I'm not sure I'm answering your exact question, Mr. Chairman, specifically where it is for the. But Section 3 is where it addresses it. And the
I guess
procedure
specifically I want to know if I've got a credit, if I earn a credit and I want to sell it,
okay.
What process do I go through in notifying the state or whoever? I guess the purchaser of the credit would have an interest in some sort of verification or certification that it was a valid credit, that it was collectible through the state against my income tax liability. Are there limitations that are different for entities, corporations, for instance, opposed to individuals and that sort of thing? Could you summarize what you've done that, I think, here in the bill, but I don't completely understand what your methodology was, and I thought you might want to expand on that.
And my understanding is that the individual, if desiring to either transfer or purchase, would have to submit to the department a request to do that. And I may have to defer to lay counsel, or if Joe's here, but the revenue, and therefore would get approval for the transfer or purchase of that credit from the Department of Revenue before they could proceed forward taking that credit.
I guess maybe I'd like to know what the criteria for that approval would be.
Section 1 number one, walks through a little bit that, Mr. Chairman. Which involves some of the responsibility that is the transferor's responsibility to provide some of the information to the department of how much the balance is left, how much is available, and I guess.
It looks to me like it's written notification to the department within 30 days.
That's correct. Yes,
transfer.
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Okay. How about summarizing for me your fiscal note and the economic impact
Yes,
of
sir.
this legislation?
We went back and forth on the fiscal note and make sure we got it right based on and what we're looking at is under two scenarios. If this law would have been in place for last year on the projects that were done in the state, the cost of the Treasury would be about $2,600,000. There is anticipation that as a result of the incentive related to this legislation that the projects would increase, and the assumption that the Department of Audits and Accounts has taken is that the number of projects would more than double, almost 2 times as many, and that the amount of investment would significantly increase too. I think that's a stretch, but under that scenario, the fiscal note says there would be a cost of around $10 million under that scenario if it were to see that significant projection. What I think has not been taken into account here is that a lot of this will occur over time. All the tax credits won't be taken all at one time in a particular year. They have 10 years to take them out. So there's going to be a stretching of the credit. So in my opinion, I still think the $10 million is still a stretch as far as what potentially could happen. I think the better way to look at it is, okay, if we took the projects that we have now and what would happen, it would be a $2,600,000 cost to the state.
But the fiscal note I have in front of me says it is a yearly cost estimate. So the $10 million would be, if the upper limit were reached, that would probably be an annual cost.
That is correct, yes, sir. Again, I think their assumption that they took was that each credit for each project would be taken fully in the year that it was incurred, and that really is not in reality what's happened. They would be potentially taking that credit over a period of years.
Okay. Any other questions for the author? Any member of the committee wish to be heard on the proposition before the committee today? My goodness, we're going to start meeting later in the day. You guys are just almost comatose up here.
Mr. Chairman, I thought it was just a good presentation, maybe skills. Maybe is that not what it is?
Mr. Freshman, we have never seen a good presentation from a freshman, and
I figured that was the case. Yeah.
Willing to say any of that started today either. Any comments from members of the committee? I see none. What's the will of the committee? Have a motion do pass and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Mr. Peake, miraculously, we are going to transfer this worthy legislation by unanimous vote to the Rules Committee. You actually did an outstanding job. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. I appreciate your support.
Is any other business by any member of the committee to come before the committee? Seeing none, we stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Sales tax?